One of the things that got me involved in politics was defending Israel. I mean, literally, I was a philosophy major, not really doing politics. And when I saw an editorial in the paper at UCLA comparing Ariel Sharon, who's the prime minister, to Adolf Eichmann, that's what got me involved in politics. I walked into the office over at the editor-in-chief and I said, I want to write a counter to this. And I started writing a column that turned into a syndicated column that turned into a career. The left in the United States has now been taken over by a sort of ideology that suggests that anything that is successful must inherently be discriminatory. And because Israel is successful, it's more discriminatory. I don't think it's any coincidence, by the way, that the left's ideas on Israel began to shift immediately upon Israel winning the Six-Day War. And until then, Israel was a darling of the left. What I'm worried about is the rising generation. What we've actually watched in places like the United States, it's not that they come into institutions and these institutions civilize them, which is normally the way people grow up. Instead, they've come into these institutions, they've wrecked the institutions from within. And Israel had a pretty strong post-Zionist movement in the late 90s, and then it seems to have faded away after particularly the abandonment of Gaza and the rise of Hamas. It seems like the hard left that sees Israel's history as brutal and vicious and questions whether Israel has a right to exist. It seems like that's become an extraordinarily minority position, thank God, in the state of Israel. But don't re-import it from the United States, where it's become a relatively powerful position. The transgender ideology that's been purveyed here is violative of biology, it's violative of reason, it's violative of basic language, it's violative of physics. Don't import all the gender ideology nonsense. And people instinctively know that it's nonsense. I think that it's a huge ideological and historical error, obviously, to start with the Holocaust. In fact, it's the case that the anti-Semites make against the state of Israel. Barack Obama used to make this case fairly frequently. When he would talk about the state of Israel, he would talk about the Holocaust. Joe Biden does the same sort of thing. Trump, because his people actually understand the history, he wouldn't start there. He would start with the Bible. Most Jews are not particularly Jewish in identity. Right, so true Jewish identity means that, like any other religious person, if you ask a Christian, what is your core identity? They'll say, my core identity is a Christian. Right? If you ask a Muslim, what's your core identity? They'll say, my core identity is a Muslim. If you ask a Jew, what's your core identity? They'll say, I like social justice and I'm very concerned with the issues of the world. That's not going to give you any sense of identity with the state of Israel.
Is there any candidate that you would like to run?
I want Governor DeSantis from Florida to run. He's terrific. Governor DeSantis is a stud. Really? Yeah, he's wonderful. Senator Tom Cotton from Arkansas is excellent. Nikki Haley, former American ambassador to the UN. I really like Nikki a lot. There are a bunch of candidates who I think are really good on the right side of the aisle. I think that Donald Trump has an enormous amount of baggage. I think that he would have the toughest time beating a Democrat.
The former Prime Minister, Mr. Netanyahu, people say that he might be the next Prime Minister. Is it good news?
I mean, I think that that's probably good news for the state of Israel. I think that the coalition government that was established simply in opposition to Prime Minister Netanyahu was obviously going to fall apart. It was only a question of when it was going to fall apart. Literally, the only thing holding it together was how much people disliked Benjamin Netanyahu. I've been following Arutz Sheva since the very, very early days of Arutz Sheva, when it was basically like you either read the communist propaganda in Haaretz or you listened to pirate radio offshore. So I've been following Arutz Sheva for a while.
And there's a beautiful flag behind you, the American flag.
Yeah,
we still love it a lot. Toda rabba.